At the end of each year's trip, we all gather at our last meal together and throw in our ideas of where we should head the following year. Last year we were on the west coast in Whanganui, so we decided to head off in the completely opposite direction on the other side of the North Island and base ourselves at Gisborne. This year the trip would not be just a long weekend, but a full-on week-long expedition right round the East Cape. The bulk of the crew attending the meeting in Gisborne had already left Wellington on the Saturday and stayed just north of Napier. Because I travel a lot with work, driving non-stop Auckland to Gisborne was not that daunting, but no matter which way you slice it, there's no shortcuts to Gisborne. I deliberately chose to ignore Google and travel via the Waihi Gorge to Tauranga. The new Tupuki bypass was interesting, with a 110km speed limit, which is when you notice other drivers' fascination with vintage vehicles. It's a 2-lane superhighway, and I had cars sitting behind me at 80km an hour. Quite happy to enjoy the spectacle of a soft-top Series 1, loaded with gear and off for an adventure. A convoy of 3 cars followed me halfway to Matata before I stopped for a cup of coffee. I filled up at a potiki and stopped for another coffee, parked down by the old Tauranga Bridge, well off the road. Bad weather was predicted in Gisborne, but I was enjoying the Waikura Gorge with the canvas sides rolled up, until near the head of the gorge, where I could see a big wall of misty poo building up ahead. I quickly pulled off the road and strapped the sides down when the heavens just opened up. Last year the Hareworth four-wheel drive safari was postponed due to COVID restrictions, but Mark Warren and Nick Stewart organised a run for Oxford through Andrew Thomas's property west of Tutira, where I met Darcy Hamilton and his restored Series 1 longwheel-based flat deck. Turned out Darcy was good mates with Leon Zwetloot, the organiser of this year's event, and today Darcy was showing us around his backyard.
Kevin to Leon, convoy has stopped. I repeat, convoy has stopped. Over.
Following the driver's safety briefing, we saddled up and headed south towards Napier, but only got a few minutes down the road before we had our first casualty. The flash new electronic SU fuel pump on Trevor Collins's 1953 Series 1 had just stopped, but fortunately he'd packed a spare and was soon on our way. We left State Highway 2 and headed straight into the interior, along Motu Road, before turning east up Parikanipa Road, which followed the ridge lines, gaining the highest point of around 600 metres, with many lefts and many rights, tight corrugated splattered corners, to eventually pop us back onto Rotu Road. As we made our way along the high ridge, the weather continued to close in as the roads got rougher and more sloppy from being churned up by the large logging trucks. Little did we know that this was just an appetizer for Wednesday when we were heading up the east coast on the inland road. Back at Rotu Road, we turned east again before turning west onto Ruakaka Road and made the steep descent down to Doneraile Park. I've stayed here a few times on various four-wheel drive trips, and it's a magic camping spot in the right weather, well worth a diversion if you're in the area. We continued down Ruakaka Road before arriving at Darcy's place, where the Hamiltons had laid on a truly magnificent spread of hot cups of tea and coffee, pies, savouries, cakes, pastries, which were all gratefully consumed by a parched and starving crew, bang on midday. Unfortunately not the morning tea timing that Darcy had planned, but certainly didn't hear any complaints after that feed, I can tell you.
The Richardson, yeah. When they had the Model A rally to get the Gianna. So you got a Model A, have you?
Tummies filled and comfort stops had, we pressed on through the rain-soaked Ruakaka Road to come out by the now closed Tineroto pub. The original plan was to do a zigzag route up over the range east of Poti, which I did several years ago on the Mahia four-wheel drive safari, but due to the bad weather we stuck to the roads. But with the logging trucks cutting up the soft white clay roads, four-wheel drivers needed just to maintain forward momentum. There has been a Tineroto tavern on the site since 1884, with the first one burning down in 1898 and the second in 1923. This building, the New Lake Hotel, was established in 1925, but with the downturn of the New Zealand economy, not helped with our prolonged border closure, it has recently closed indefinitely, with the loss of a major community meeting point, so essential for the mental health of folk living in rural New Zealand. We stopped in the rain-soaked Turanga to admire the falls before continuing up the Waikura Valley.
Another condenser in.
Oh, really?
Big flames out the exhaust, smack pop, no power. No? Loud explosions?
Brent had had a bit of a flame out and ground to a halt just past the Ruakaturi school. First diagnosis was a failed condenser. There was more likely worn points and slipped timing, so the points were reset and a tweak on the distributor, and we're off to catch a team up along Papuni Road. I've travelled the narrow Papuni Road up the Ruakaturi River a few times to visit the military graves of Captain Carr and Constables Canning, Coates, Condon, Bryan and Rihara, who were killed in action on the 8th of August 1868 during the pursuit of Te Kuti, following his escape from the Chatham Islands. This trip was the first time I was able to continue up the road as far as Puketapu, the citadel pa of Te Kuti, where he planned the horrific attack on the civilians at Matawhero, 10th of November 1868, killing 33 settlers and 37 Maori. After lunch at about 3:30, we headed back to Gisborne on wet sealed roads and fading light. The clumps of clay falling from the vehicles left the road looking like a dairy herd had passed through. But back at camp was one of those days when you can actually feel the cold beer absorb into every pore.
Okay, so the plan for today, a bit more of a relaxed day. Just across the road here is the steam train or steam engine shed, and we've arranged that we go and have a look at it. We don't know if we can get it out the shed or not. From there at 10:30 we're booked in at the West Coast Transports Museum.
That's a long way.
She was on the East Coast one.
Oh, the East Coast one, yeah.
Tuesday dawned wet and humid, not a typical Gisborne day. The itinerary for today was to have a look around a couple of museums and then head way the hell up the back to Rewe Falls. But following the long haul to Gisborne over the weekend and the 10-hour drive on Monday round Tinoroto, I think everyone was grateful to blame the deteriorating weather and just chill out. Across the road at the back of the camp is the Gisborne City Vintage Rail and the home of the locomotive WA165. This steam engine was built in 1897 in Dunedin and ended up being shipped into Gisborne in 1911 and worked on the Gisborne to Motu line for 31 years. It eventually ended up rotting in a local park for 18 years before being rescued and restored. As we turned into the Tech Museum at Makaraka, Mark Peters from the Gisborne Herald had seen the convoy and tagged him behind looking for a story. So I put him on to Leon.
So during the years, there's probably a basic Land-Rover. There's probably 16 different versions of a basic Land-Rover.
Shrimp is the fruit of the sea. You can barbecue it, boil it,
Long wheelbase, short wheelbase, hard top steak,
bake it, saute it,
bacon soft top, flat deck.
shrimp Creole,
Then you've got the truck cab,
deep fried, stir fried,
the long wheelbase truck cab with a wooden deck.
pineapple shrimp,
Some have a well-side deck.
lemon shrimp,
There was a 6-cylinder engine.
coconut shrimp.
Yeah, so as well as all the different models, you got all these different varieties of options that you could fit.
That's about it.
Well, I did try to warn him. Anyway, the weather had really packed up by this stage, so it was all good to be undercover. We managed to find the important bits of the museum and record some serial numbers. On our way back to camp, I took the team into Makaraka Cemetery to pay our respects to the victims of Te Kuti's bayonet and tomahawk attack on the civilians of Matawhero, where he killed 33 settlers and 37 Maori at 2 a.m. on the 10th of November 1868. Last night I was contacted by Mark Peters from the Gisborne Herald, and we arranged to meet up for a group photo for the newspaper, but I'd forgotten we're heading up the inland route to Tokomaru Bay, so after a few false starts, Mark agreed to follow us up the Waikura Valley to find a suitable backdrop for a photo. Back in 2019, I attended the Motu School Safari, and due to the high fire risk, the convoy was locked out of a forest high up in the Raukuma range. The organisers were scrambling to come up with a quick alternative to get the convoy up to Ruatoria, and came up with the Waikura Valley Road to drop us back down from the ridge to State Highway 35 just south of Tokomaru Bay. These inland network of roads follow a high ridge line about halfway between the coastal State Highway 35 and the high Raukuma Ranges to the west. The dominant users of these roads are logging trucks.
Logging truck coming, just gone past it. Proceed.
When we drove the route back in 2019, the soft sedimentary clay had turned to an extremely fine powdered dust, which would choke a camel. But great news, team, the recent heavy rainfall meant no dust. Instead, we encountered truck and trailer units loaded with road metal, attempting to lay a grippy surface on the soft pumice and sedimentary mud to prevent the logging trucks from becoming bogged.
There's a truck and trailer unit just coming up to you, Darcy.
Everyone pull over when you can. Pull over when you can.
The constant hammering of the rough corrugations was taking its toll on the vintage Land Rovers. Paul Furkett suffered a snapped gearbox mount, bouncing the gearbox out of place. The roads were a real shocker. The sheer weight of the logging trucks had punched the metal down through the clay, and the slop was diff deep in many places.
We turn right here.
I can definitely need to change the filter on Monday now, won't you, eh? My God.
Guys, I think we're going the wrong way.
Rosie, here's what's that?
I had a discussion with Darcy and he said he didn't want to go this way. We're supposed to be turning left here.
Having travelled the same route a couple of years ago, I'd uploaded the track to my phone the previous day, so I was able to lead from behind.
Bloody Aucklanders, eh?
Going the wrong way.
I knew that as soon as I got on the road. That's probably
The roads are so bad they had to tow the horses out with the quad bikes. Yeah, well, maybe not. The roads would have been impassable in a two-wheel drive vehicle, begging the questions on why the government has imposed a ute tax. No place for an electric Nissan Leaf out here, buckwheat. Darcy was all keen for us to try a Tokomaru Power Pie and rang ahead to check on stocks. I managed to catch the exact moment when he broke the news to Leon that they had plenty. We eventually popped out at Tokomaru Bay and stopped for the recommended medicinal pie around 1:30 p.m, and to top up our tiny fuel tanks. The damage report from a few of the old cars was not great. A locally produced suspension had collapsed and Brent had lost a U-bolt securing the front axle to the leaf springs. Fortunately, I'd packed some spares of various lengths for just such an eventuality. After lunch we followed the bay north to the old freezing works and wool store by the Tokomaru Wharf. The Tokomaru Bay freezing works were erected in 1911 through the efforts and fundraising of the local farmers. The New Zealand Shipping Company offices, the wool store, the manager's house and stables were also constructed in 1912. The existing wharf was extended out to 365 metres offshore in 1937 to handle larger vessels, and over 100,000 tonnes of cargo was shipped in 1939. However, with the improvements of overland transport routes and the decline in overseas shipping caused the closure of the freezing works in 1952. We pressed on northward as the weather cleared, with a stop outside the Tupuia Hot Springs Hotel and a detour off State 35 to Waipiro Bay, where we found a very sad little Series 1 Land Rover parked at the back of a house. Darcy led us into Ruatoria on the hunt for a restored Series 1 owned by the local publican, but with the fear of COVID spreading up the coast, the chap was not too keen on strangers, so we continued on north. A quick stop at Tiki Tiki to see the famous historic church. St Mary's was built in 1926 and is a traditional European design outside, but an absolutely stunning display of Maori art on the inside, including a stained glass window depicting Maori soldiers in uniform from the First World War. Unfortunately, the church was closed, so I have to borrow these photographs from Natalia Voldner. We arrived at Te Aroa camp just before 6 PM. We were booked in for a meal at the Hicks Bay Motel, so it was a quick change and off to dinner. The weka and the magpies were in good song this morning, but the day was still making its mind up to be fine or not. According to the reports we heard, the road around the coast east of Te Aroa was closed due to slips. The Honourable Shane Jones, ex-MP, had handed over a wodge of cash to get the road sealed all the way up to the Cape Lighthouse, but maybe some cash should have been spent on stabilising the hillside above. The Te Aroa camp didn't have a microwave, so no oats for Kev this morning. So I decided to have a Dad's bacon and egg pie, the cornerstone of every nutritious breakfast, and I grabbed a second one to put in my pocket for later to form the basis of an equally nutritious lunch. We stopped near the Aratua River to pay our respects to some not so fortunate Land Rovers. I thought this was a good place to share this bit of film I captured when I was last here 9 months ago. This is a carpet of spiderweb, commonly called gossamer. I've only ever seen this once before, again on the coast, just south of Oamaru in the South Island.
big ones, you know. They're trying to...
Fortunately, the road was open, but unfortunately the 300 plus steps to the lighthouse was closed due to the slippery conditions. The East Cape Lighthouse was originally the East Island Lighthouse and was first switched on in August 1900, but years of earthquakes eroded the cliffs on the island to the point where the lighthouse was dismantled and reassembled on its present site, 154 metres above sea level. The lighthouse was automated in 1985 and the lighthouse keeper was moved out. I took some photos of the flash news cell site just below the lighthouse and we headed back to Te Aroa for some calmer weather. At the Te Aroa General Store, we discovered we had made the front page of the Gisborne Herald, and Leon was beating off all the adoring fans wanting an autograph. Well, maybe not. But we gassed up and headed off west around the coast.
Yeah, camping here, I'm just turning right now, over. Got it. That's the last time I've been to Horseshoe Bay.
That's just Horseshoe Bay.
Horseshoe Bay, yeah.
Darcy wanted to take us up the Waikura Valley for a quick look. I've been up the valley a few times on the Motu school trips, and I wasn't aware of a quick look. I was lucky we did stock up on fuel, as the quick look turned out to be a 6.5 hour drive, but it was well worth it. We stopped off at Waitanga here to pick up a mate of Darcy's, Sean Bosnahan, who kindly offered to be our tour guide for the trip up the valley today. We pulled into Waikura Station for a health and safety briefing and to sign indemnity forms. I've stayed here a few times over the years with a Motu school safari, but last year's event we didn't venture up the coast, but stayed in the Motu area. So it was great to be back here again.
Plant or equipment, don't enter unauthorised work areas, farm buildings or parts of the farms that have not been authorised or have no reason to visit. Do not disturb or unnecessarily approach farm animals.
We were permitted to do a quick drive past the original Waikura homestead at the end of the road. I've not seen the old homestead before, and I'm unable to find any information on the building online, but I understand the building faces down the Whanganui River, as that was the original way to get into the valley, following the river up through the gorge. Most of the Waikura Valley is owned by Christian Welt, the owner of the Swiss-based Monte Capital. The large-scale investment has turned marginal farmland into a very diverse, sustainable business, injecting huge amounts of capital into the local economy. The recent addition of Tikumi Farm at the southern end of the valley has enabled us to travel further than I've ever been on previous trips here before, and plans to open up public walkways for more people to enjoy the secret valley of the east coast. Darcy and Sean had a special treat in store for us all. A visit to a secluded hut high on the Raukuma Ranges above the Ruakakuri River. What a magic spot on a glorious day. We had a brew and a good country slice of Jan's fruitcake, and I enjoyed my body temperature pie for lunch. Someone has gone to a lot of effort to build this water feature, probably fed from a small dam further up the creek next to the hut, piped down to the trough, and fed up through a hollowed out tree branch to run continuously, to overflow back down the hill to the creek.
The muzzle station.
Where's that one?
Eh?
No, where's that one?
That goes in
Is that
from
behind
the back of
Clarence?
Waikura.
Yeah, and behind Clarence, yeah.
Into the
yeah.
town.
Clarence River,
Have you
yeah.
done that?
No, I haven't, no. The opportunity can never present itself, I believe. You would have definitely done it.
If I'd known you 6 months ago, I'd have said, fly down.
Oh, really?
Oh, heck, yes.
Of course, I wouldn't turn you down if you told me to fly down. I could be on the next plane, dude.
Oh. You're low, so handy. We don't have it.
We made our way back out to State Highway 35 by just after 5 p.m, and we still had another 130 kilometres drive to our overnight accommodation at Paruki, but it'd be hard to complain driving this coastline in perfect warm and calm conditions despite the sunstrike.
Are we calling them to the church to have a look?
Built in 1894, the Ruakokori Church has a stunning location right on the beach. Ruakokori is the hometown of film director Taika Waititi, and the church is only a few kilometres down the river from where we had lunch, high above the Ruakokori River. We all made it to the Oparuki Holiday Park just after 7 p.m. Being the 17th of March, St Patrick's Day, we wandered down to the Masonic Irish pub for a Guinness. By the time we got there, I think there was a grand total of about 5 slightly wobbly forestry chaps wearing high-vis shirts and pub-lined leprechaun hats, propping up their mortal remains against the bar. Time for bed, I suspect. Friday, the day I've been waiting for since the trip was announced. The chance to drive my Series 1 over the Motu Road. I've driven right through the Motu Road 3 times over the years. First time was in a 1979 long wheelbase Series 3 Land-Rover. The next was in a Discovery, and again only a couple of years ago in the Defender. But I've always wanted to take the Series 1 through, and today was the day. My unit had a microwave, whoop whoop, unlike the Tiara camp. So all coffeed up, we headed back up the coast as far as the Waikura River, before turning inland on the Motu Road to follow the river up into the gorge.
I must say, John, say again. I said you're not in Germany now, or is it Holland? You're right or not?
We gained altitude quite quickly, passing a few cyclists before the Mary settled at 460 metres, just 17 kilometres inland, all heading to the Parika track. We stopped for a dust-washing cuppa at the intersection of Takapatahi Road and more of Jan's Cake, before crossing the Witakau Saddle at 650 metres and dropping into the Waikura Valley. Here the road widens to accommodate for the logging trucks, transporting pine from further up the valley to the port of Gisborne. Been so looking forward to this part of the journey, to drive up to the dense bush gorges. I decided to drive with the back of the canvas hood open to enjoy the trip to the max, which acts like a giant vacuum cleaner, sucking up a few kilos of dust into the back along the way. From here, the hillside bench road follows a densely forested ridge at about 600 metres, with sheer drops off to the side to the wooded valleys below, and the blue haze off north with no sign of any open valley or track. It's a good steady climb to the ornate entry to the Pākehī track, said to be the longest downhill mountain bike track in the country, popping out the head of the Otara Valley, next to Barry Crump's old place. I was tail end again today, so when I caught up with John Hickey hunting for a comfort stop, I pulled over and switched the engine off. John drove off just as I reached for the starter button when the lights went out. Turned out to be a battery terminal rattled loose with the rough corrugations, but the utter silence with only a distant songbird deep in the bush to break it made it tempting to enjoy it a bit longer. Over the Whanganui saddle, the road bursts out of the bush into open farmland and winds down into the Motu Valley below. We regrouped to pull in together outside the Motu school as clickbait for Paul and Shelley Cornwall, school teachers and organisers of the Motu School Safari, and very keen four-wheelers, just to say hello. I think it took probably a minute for them to appear. It was great to catch up before heading into the Motu Falls for lunch. On Tuesday we visited the Gisborne City Vintage Railway and saw the engine WA165, which had worked the Gisborne to Motu line for 31 years. Not far out of Motu is one of the few remaining reminders of how far the railway line got before being closed. The railway line was to run from Gisborne to Opotiki, to link up through Tauranga to Paeroa and on to Auckland. Construction started in 1900 and the first 78 kilometres was opened as far as Motuhora on the 26th of November 1917. Even though Motuhora was on the northern side of the Waikura Ranges, there was no easy way for the railway line to link up with the rest of the network, as a practical way to drop the 500 metres down to sea level had not been worked out. By 1930, the economically viable timber had been cut out and the sawmills along the line were closing down. The line officially closed on the 14th of March 1959, with the last train on the 14th of April, bringing out a final load of road metal for the highway improvements that would use the old railway route once the rails had been lifted. From the Motu Falls, the original plan was to head down the Whakarau Road towards Tikaraka and on to Gisborne, but Darcy had a better idea. Due to the disappointment of missing out on the Riri Rock Slide on Tuesday due to the foul weather, Darcy led us through the northern route via Matawai. At Matawai on State Highway 2, we attended to a generator issue on Darcy's vehicle before heading out west and then south down Te Reo Road, Te Hora Road, Whaurikopa Road and then on to Riri Rock Slide.
Hey, this is a fan.
There are children around. Come on.
At the rock slide, a couple of chaps had a go before we moved off to Rewe Falls, where we parted company. Some of the fellowship heading back north to Opotiki for the night, while the bulk of the team headed east to Gisborne for our last meal together, and to take part in the decision making for the direction of next year's expedition. It's always with some reluctance that we part company. Over the past 12 years we've all become very close friends and enjoy each other's company immensely, but with the most troops being based in Wellington, we generally have little contact through the year until closer to the next gathering. I travelled with Peter and Pauline Prosy, stopping off to show them some of the points of interest along the way. We stopped for lunch at Ohiwa, and here we parted. Peter and Pauline heading up to Auckland, with myself heading to Whanganui for a family meeting, unfortunately under sad circumstances, with the passing of my father last Wednesday when we were in Te Araroa on the East Cape. So till next year guys, special thanks go to our tour guide Darcy Hamilton of Tineroto and Leon Zwetlied from Wellington for another great expedition. So where to next year? Somewhere a bit more central, I suspect.